Okay. All right, guys. We'll get started with our first presentation here. Just a real quick note of how these are going to run. So each group, the presenters are going to take about 5 minutes just to give you a quick rundown. At the end of the group, we're going to open it up to questions and a discussion. Okay, so they're going to kind of just go through the stuff real quick, and we'll save the questions and inputs for the end of that group. And again, the major sort of goal here is that we use most of our time for discussion and dialogue, questions and input. Not so much just looking at the presentations, but sort of just using this as a foundation. So go ahead, take it away now.
Okay, well, I was asked to give a history lesson, since I'm the oldest person here, except for maybe Jim Markowski.
You're older than me.
And yeah, I am. And I've been coming to this station since 1966 or 67. And when I was in Cub Scouts, we went swimming between here and the highway. So I've been swimming here for a long time. Somehow I didn't finish my slide. It looks cattywampus because I didn't finish it, so let's get it off the slide. So the history lesson is that as you dig into studying the ecology and management of these weeds, do your homework. Turn off the internet and go to the library, because there's a lot of stuff that you need to read that's not. And case in point is my master's thesis advisor at Texas Tech, Bill Dahl, will pop up if you go look hard enough. And so I have never really seriously worked on Medusahead or Goatgrass. I've dabbled, I've been a collaborator on a couple of projects, but I've never made it a big part of my program, partly because we had people like Joe DiTomaso and his predecessors who allowed me to do other things. Not we But anyway, if you went and dug around, you'd find Bill Dahl, and I could only find one picture of 2/3 of it. And he's passed on now.
The button, the other button?
No, there, no, wrong line. Ah! Okay, and then my PhD advisor also worked on Medusahead, and he's also passed on. But his name is Cyrus McKell, and when he was at UC Davis in the old agronomy department, he worked with Jack Majors and a former farm advisor, John Robinson, on Medusahead. So I do have a history, an academic family history, but not necessarily a personal history. If you go back and just study here in California, you have to go back at least to 1928, when Dr. Kennedy, who at the time was at Berkeley, because that's where the ag program was exclusively at that time, or no, it had started already, but anyway, that's where he was, and he did a paper on goatgrass. So do your homework, is my admonition regarding our history. I don't know everything. You may think I do, but I don't, and you have to go read some of these things to get a real handle on what people did in the past. Now, I was asked to kind of comment on management barriers, and I left a few off of here, like economics, but you guys will get to that. You've already got in the questionnaire. But I view, as I thought about it over 30 plus years, I recognize some public policy barriers. If we need to treat millions of acres, which if we're going to do this, that's what we're talking about. We have public policy barriers, we have barriers of cooperation, we have conflicting goals, and then we have an extension service and a research programs in the university and elsewhere that aren't adequately funded to do the job, even though we have people who work really hard at it all the time. So public policy barriers, the big one is restrictions on burning, I think. If you're going to treat a lot of acres, burning probably is one of your preferred methods. So we need to work on the Air Resources Board somehow, and I honestly don't know how that's done. But I can tell you that in the past, we've had people that preceded me, faculty that preceded some of our existing faculty, that worked in Sacramento on public policy issues and actually helped develop something called the Vegetation Management Program back 20 or plus years ago, that allowed private landowners to burn in collaboration with CAL FIRE, CDF, and that program shouldered part of the liability in case fire died. You never hear about that program anymore, but if you're going to dig into the people part of how this is going to get done, you better go review that program and see what it was and whether it can be resurrected or altered. I think we need a rangeland public policy specialist somewhere in our system working on these things, or a natural resource public policy. Now I have a pet breed. I see a lot of public money invested in unproven large-scale restoration efforts that fail that include controlling these weeds. And I very frankly, it may sound very Republican of me, but I think that we need to base our public policies on sound science and not warm and fuzzy environmentalism. I'm retired now. I can say what I think. I just can't. Cooperation barriers. I don't know how many times I've had ranchers tell me that they don't control weeds because their neighbors don't. You got to get past that barrier. We have weed management areas in the state. I'm not sure how active they are. I'm sure some are active and some are less active. But we need to use that mechanism to address large-scale areas. Everybody get on the bandwagon and do something. Okay? If you go back into the 50s and 60s, there was something called County Range Improvement Associations. Again, rangeland owners collaborated with CAL FIRE and other agencies to have prescribed burns to control brush. So we have a past of cooperating, and we can have a future of cooperating. Livestock production, there's conflicting things like ranchers want to grow good forage, and it's not necessarily native perennials. And restoration wants to grow native perennials that aren't necessarily proven to satisfy rancher needs. Extension, I think we can facilitate, besides being involved in the research education continuum, it's the farm advisor or the specialist that commonly facilitating collaboration, whether it's on a large scale area or a few neighbors or whatever it is. And we have to keep that in mind as we think about the bigger thing that we think the Extension Service does, and that's technology transfer and education, which was re-highlighted in the SEEK report of 2011, the Conservation Effectiveness, I forgot what it stands for. Anyway. And then we need to support specialist advisors that go travel and do training, because we don't have any training funds anymore. And finally, research. There's lots of things to do. The SEEK report called for it to be science-based solutions to invasive plant management. You need to do your literature review, state-of-the-art review. The wheel does not want to be reinvented. I'm not going to talk about all the methods. There's plenty of people here and they talk about them ad nauseum. You need to study and document restoration failures. I think that's an important thing to work on. It's connected to this, because that's where you can get some new hypotheses developed to tackle these issues. And all of this needs to be on a basic ecology of invasive species. And I think that's my last slide.
All right, that was perfect.
We got our next speaker loaded up here, and the next speaker is she's a new natural resource and livestock advisor, one of the newest hires that we have in cooperative extension. She's going to talk about recent needs assessment.
So like what Sharon said, I've been in this job for about 8 months now. So I'm in the process of trying to do a need assessment. That's why that's what I'm going to talk about today. So my title is Recent Need Assessment Because the Importance of Race and Weed Management in the three counties that I cover, Mariposa, Madera, and Merced. To begin with, I just wanted to give a definition of what needs assessment is. The systematic process of trying to determine what the issues the people are dealing with, and what are their needs, the gaps between the current conditions and what they really want to achieve in the community. So when I did this, I had three main objectives. And the first thing I wanted to do was to get an insight. Since this was a new area for me, I wanted to get an insight into the important issues the local people are dealing with. What are some of the problems they're dealing with? And I also wanted to learn about some of the existing knowledge gaps. And after doing this, my hope is to eventually develop an extension program that is relevant to their issues and also effective and acceptable to the clients because they feel like they get an input into whatever I'll be trying to address. For the methods, I used both the direct and indirect methods. And for the direct methods included, when I visited the ranchers or property owners, I would informally interview them about what are the issues they deal with. And then I also developed a really short questionnaire asking questions about what their production systems were, what the knowledge gaps in their production systems were, and also what are some of the issues they wanted my program to address. And in terms of the indirect methods, I interviewed university employees, some of my colleagues, and I also interviewed local leaders, federal and non-governmental organization personnel about some of the previous work that has been done in the area, current issues that they know about or have heard some of the clients talk about, and also the areas that they feel needs attention into the future. And I've been doing data reviews and I continue with this to get more information. And for the results so far that I found, this graph shows a percent of respondents programs that they listed. So the highest program that was listed by the clients was weed programs. 85% of the respondents after my lead assessment identified weed issues as one of the programs they deal with. And the next one was drought, and then after that, waste management, government regulations, transport services, and wildlife programs followed in that order. So weed programs is really an issue in the three counties that I do my lead assessment for. I was working in. But what was really interesting to me was the differences in the importance of weed issues in the three counties that I covered. Mariposa had the highest respondents identify weed issues as a problem. 92%, about 92% say the weed issues, and then followed by Madera about 90%. And then Merced, only 60 people, 60% of the people identified weed as an issue. But I wanted just to dip a little bit further and see of the people that identified weed in general as an issue, how many people really talked about Medusahead as being a problem in these three counties. And 50% in Mariposa said the Medusahead issues, 20% in Madera did, but none of the respondents per se actually talked about Medusahead as an issue. So you can see, because of all these differences, the focus, when you look at the whole block of the three counties, you might feel that the focus should be the same, but when you look a little bit deeper, you see the difference in the three counties that I have. And then when I've been talking to the people about why they think Medusahead is such a challenge in controlling, these are some of the issues that have come up, that Medusahead is a grass species which can blend in with other desirable forest species, and identifying Medusahead within the grass rangeland ecosystems is also a little bit difficult because it might be mistaken by other species like oxtail. And then controlling a grass species is in rangeland settings is a problem. Trying to find a method that will selectively just kill one grass and keep the other grasses persisting. And also the other issues that there are no county-postal programs for Medusahead compared to other weeds like yellow star thistle and cattle movement between summer and fall pastures. They move up north during summer and come back down to the valley, the fall, and also they go to the foothills during summer and move to irrigated pastures during the fall. So there's lots of movement of livestock which will enable migration of Medusahead from other areas that are infested to rangeland that way. So what are my plans in the future based on the information that I have? I plan to hold weed management workshops that are focused on control methods and identifying the different weed species. And from this, my goal is to eventually hope that this will lead to a better early detection of known infections so that the control will start bringing on rather than being controlled late and there's so much Medusahead, for example, that is invading larger areas. And then I'm also trying to get started doing this, looking forward to doing demonstration talks to showcase the different methods of controlling Medusahead, including things like using milestone, fire, high intensity grazing, and after having this demonstration talks with these most field days, so that people can come and discuss different methods and also see how effective the different methods are. And I also plan on participating in larger scale studies like studies that are running in different counties. Compare follow-up treatments on mice for just to keep on treating Medusahead, because if you just treat it one season, it might not necessarily benefit the ecosystem long term. So that's it.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay. Elise, this will kind of wrap up this first segment. We'll take can you guys hear okay in the back if we project a little bit, or you guys okay?
You won't have a problem with me.
Yeah, we'll test it on Elise here, but yeah, so again, the speakers, we're trying to keep them to about 5 minutes. I'm going to stand at 1. I know it's going to be a little hard. We have a lot of good stuff to talk about, but try to get on that. So anyway, Elise.
I only have one slide, but how y'all doing? Glad you're all here today. So my colleagues and I were interested in a very, very basic question, which is how well do our control methods for Medusahead work, right? So Medusahead was introduced from Mediterranean in 1884, and since then it's been just extending its range despite our concerted efforts to control it, right? So it's now in 12 states and just continues to cover literally millions of hectares. So why is that? Why is it that despite the fact that we're attempting to control Medusahead, why is it still expanding its range? So clearly, we all know that there's problems in sort of coordinated efforts with control, and there's problems sort of translating direct research into application, but we want to take a step back and say, so these control efforts that are generally invoked to be useful for controlling Medusahead, things like targeted grazing, burning, and herbicide, how well do they actually work? So we tried to do our homework, Mel, and we went back into the literature and attempted to find every single paper that was published either in peer review, white paper, thesis, and personal data of faculty from UC Davis, and put together all this data of experiments that tested control methods. And so we found a total of 63, which is actually not very big when you consider how long it's been around. We conducted a meta-analysis, so we needed the data to be in a particular form. So of those 63 papers, we were only able to use 23. But we used these 23 papers and we conducted a meta-analysis, which allows us to look at an effect size. So I want you to look at this right-hand graph here, and what you see is the effect size on the x-axis. And this is the effect of a treatment, okay? So essentially, if you see a dot below 0, what that indicates is that that treatment, for example, herbicide, that treatment reduced the biomass or cover of Medusahead compared to control. So it reduced it, so that's good. So you have these different points. We looked at those, divided the data into annual rangeland, California, and intermountain rangeland, which was data from Utah and Oregon. And we also divided the data into response of Medusahead in the first growing season. So that's looking at how the Medusahead responds in the first year of control, and then in response in the second or third growing season. So that's later. And as I said, we divided up the control into different types of herbicide, burning, and defoliation for targeted grazing and clipping. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is that see these lines around the point. So those are 95% confidence intervals. So if any of those hit the line of 0, that means that that control did not significantly statistically significantly reduce the amount of Medusahead. So what are we seeing here? If you look on the right, we see that in the annual rangeland from California, herbicide burning and defoliation were all effective at reducing the amount of Medusahead in the first year. In the intermountain rangeland, we see that only herbicide and burning was effective in reducing the liquid. So that seems like, okay, control works, we're doing well. But if we look at response in the longer term, which is what I'm assuming most people are actually aiming for, so control over the longer term, we see that in California, none of the controls were able to significantly reduce the biomass or cover of Medusahead. And in the intermountain rangeland, herbicide and burning were useful to a small degree. Okay. Over here, I'm actually not going to get into this too much because I think Joe and other people are going to get into the herbicide more. But here we just were able to divide up the types of herbicide that were useful, and what we find in both years, glyphosate was actually more useful than most of the other herbicides, but once you get in the longer term, it's not useful. So clearly, we're not doing something right. But we keep testing these methods. So what we should probably start thinking about is expanding our idea of when we apply controls, how often. I think we also, we were looking at these 63 papers and only 23 of them were useful for our analysis. We need to start thinking about implementing sort of assessment of control efforts more into our controls. So we're really interested in hearing what you guys have to say about this either today or my email is on this. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Elise. Okay, so really, we're going to move into our next section in just a minute, but we just want to take a few minutes here and talk to you folks about your thoughts and questions. So we heard from Mel George that talked about some history, recent farm advisor needs assessment, and then just a quick quantitative review. So go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Elise.
You have to speak up just a bit.
I have a question for Elise. So for the long-term response over the second and third growing season, is that for treatments that were applied repeatedly?
No.
Okay, so that's just...
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that. So the longer-term response, that was just you applied the control 1 year and then you just...
So really not surprising.
Right. But I mean, still, a lot of people still kind of put down control. They're like, oh, it's gone this year. Great.
Okay, other Questions or comments, Josh?
My question, maybe, I don't see Larry Branham or Rob Flash, maybe Alan, you're best to answer this. I Fadzayi's presentation, I noticed that she put up, there's not a lot of cost share funds, I'm assuming that's NRCS, FEMA funds for controlling Medusahead. I don't know that I necessarily realize that in my counties. I kind of have the assumption that if we as Extension come up with control methods, the cost share funds are available, and I get the feeling from my local committees that they are. How true would that be statewide? Because that seems to not be her impression in her local county, is that being an equal priority.
Are you gonna be here this afternoon?
Yeah.
Yeah, wait to answer that. No, it's available. And then, so maybe there just might be a perception.
So Alan is within RCS, and he actually has a talk towards the end of the day. We can talk a lot about that. So,
When we're presenting data, I think if we use the word treatment instead of control, because when the word control comes out, it means usually a place that's given treatment. So
Sure.
that was confusing.
Okay. Kevin? So Elise, it's not up there anymore, but I don't want to be like a nerdy Rebecca Senegal Farm, but on the second, the long-term thing, so they're down there, there's differences, and they're below that line, and you notice that the sample size goes down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you sample for the second
Right, and
So
so
I'm not trying to
obviously
be-
the sample size goes down and as probably noticed,
Yeah.
the harvest increases. Yeah, so we don't have that data, but it's certainly some range.
No?
So I would add that in our weed control efforts and the restoration of Ogden Falls, that we rarely report our failures.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You never see a failure published anywhere, not even.
Yeah, so this might even be an overestimation.
Yeah.
Hard to get a raise when you say I screwed up.
I heard restoration ecologists say that only 20% of restoration projects meet their goals.
Right. So one point that's just kind of emerging, I just want to try to capture is, so Elise's data, obviously very short term, 1 to 2 years, none of us would even think that's long term. Long-term data is maybe pretty sparse in the literature, and also the failures are pretty sparse. So it seems like, based on those 2 points, you need to have a much stronger handle on the long-term treatment effects are, even if they are just one-time intervention efforts. What does that happen? How does that change the plan? So any other thoughts on sort of just setting the stage, a little bit of that background and information, Dan?
These aren't really restoration, it's more
Can you
rehabilitation.
speak up a little bit?
It's more rehabilitation. I think we should get away from using the term restoration. You're always going to have the presence of these weeds. So it's not true restoration. A lot of times you're using introduced species to revegetate. I mean, you're setting up a failure if you're going to keep presenting as restoration instead of like a rehabilitation.
Good point. Good point.
I was going to ask the same question, what is control, and how do you really, on the large scale, figure out if you've got control or not? Do you wait 20 years and you've got it again, or is it 5 years and what's the return cycle into this population? I was sort of confused about what the end result of these were.
Did you guys all hear him back there? This question is basically, when do we get to the end point? What is successful control? And I think that kind of reflects, that idea that we don't know. We don't have a lot of that long-term data. Anybody else make some comments on sort of just setting the stage and some initial thoughts about? Okay, we're going to move on to